I want you to imagine, just for a moment, uh, the actual architecture of the modern internet.
Right, not just the cloud concept, but the physical reality.
Exactly. Not the abstract idea floating above us. I mean, the physical space. Picture yourself standing inside, like the most advanced multi-million-dollar data center in the world.
And it's an environment built entirely on absolute, uncompromising logic. You are surrounded by the absolute peak of human engineering.
Yeah, the corridors are blindingly clean, like sterile white. There is zero dust.
Right. No variation in the lighting whatsoever, just pure clinical control.
And you're walking past rows upon rows of these massive server racks, just millions of blinking LED lights. And they represent, I mean, petabytes of global data.
Which is everything, right? Financial records, social media histories, highly encrypted government communications.
All of it. And the sound in this place is just overwhelming. It's this constant, aggressively loud mechanical roar.
From the cooling systems.
Yeah, the state-of-the-art liquid nitrogen cooling. Because they have these massive cryogenic loops pumping sub-zero fluid through the entire facility just to keep all that processing power from literally catching fire.
Because that level of computation generates immense heat. So it's an ecosystem of pure predictability, really. Binary code, ones and zeros. Everything is rigorously monitored.
Exactly. It's regulated within these incredibly strict thermodynamic and digital parameters. But then, as you walk down one of these pristine aisles, deep in the subterranean levels of a place called the Silicon Vault.
You turn a corner,
and sitting right there, right in the middle of all this sterile silicon and glowing fiber optics, is just this massive spatial violation.
A complete anomaly.
Yeah. It is a single machine, but it's built from like 1920s rusted iron gears.
Which is just jarring. I mean, it's a completely anachronistic piece of hardware. It's a physical impossibility that totally breaks the visual logic of the room.
And it isn't just sitting there like some forgotten museum piece either, or, an art installation. It's running.
It's active.
It is actively running. You are looking at this archaic collection of heavy rusted metal, exposed copper wire, and glowing glass vacuum tubes.
And somehow, this obsolete, decaying machine is actively bending the laws of physics right in front of your eyes.
It's nuts. Finding a running 1920s gear and tube engine inside a modern cryogenic server farm is, well, it's like finding a living dinosaur standing in the middle of a sterile spacecraft.
Right. It immediately tells you that the rules of the environment you are standing in have been fundamentally compromised. The physics are broken.
And that is the exact visual I want you to hold on to for this deep dive. So, welcome. Today, we are undertaking a mission that is going to pull us far outside the comforting, predictable realm of standard computer science.
Way outside. We are unpacking a highly classified investigation, which is simply titled Case File #66 Vulcan.
Case File #66 Vulcan, which documents an exhaustive analysis of a phenomenon that the investigators reluctantly came to call the analog ghost.
Reluctantly is the key word there. Scientists do not like using the word ghost.
No, they really don't. But we are going to dissect the terrifying events and the frankly, empirically impossible evidence surrounding this single server unit.
Known as RAC-09.
RAC-09, yeah. And our goal today isn't just to, list a bunch of anomalies. We need to understand the mechanics of the creeping, suffocating dread that this room produces.
Because the supernatural details documented by the recovery team are deeply unsettling. We have to completely discard our usual analytical frameworks here.
Yeah, we are not evaluating processing power or network latency today. We are exploring this chilling intersection where archaic machinery violently collides with the occult.
And the deeper you get into Case File #66 Vulcan, the more obvious it becomes that this isn't just a story about a broken machine.
Or even a hijacked network, right? It is an investigation into an environment that has become actively biologically hostile to the people observing it.
Hostile is the exact right word. And it's wild because that hostility doesn't begin with a digital error message on a screen.
Right.
It begins with the physical atmosphere of the room itself.
So let's start right there. Let's talk about the sheer physical sensation of stepping into the basement level of the Silicon Vault. Because the investigation notes give us this visceral breakdown of what it actually feels like to share a space with RAC-09.
And it begins with an assault on our oldest, most primal sense, which is smell.
Yeah, which is fascinating.
It's incredibly revealing from a neurobiological standpoint. Scent actually bypasses the logical reasoning centers of the human brain. It bypasses the neocortex and routes directly to the amygdala and the hippocampus.
And those are the centers responsible for emotion and survival instincts.
Exactly. Memory, emotion, core survival. So
Wow.
when you smell something, your body reacts before your brain even fully processes what it is.
And if you've ever spent time in a modern server room, you know what it smells like. It's a very distinct synthetic odor.
It smells like warm plastic.
Yeah, high-grade plastic, ozone from the air purifiers, maybe a faint hint of static electricity. It smells dry, it smells safe.
But the microclimate surrounding RAC-09 completely overwrites that synthetic sterility.
Right. The lead investigator noted that the moment you cross the threshold into that specific aisle, the air smells intensely of, and this is a direct quote, wet copper and ozone from a thunderstorm that hasn't happened yet.
Wet copper and pre-storm ozone. I mean, to really unpack
Yep.
that specific combination of scents for a second.
It's deeply unnerving. Why is that so unsettling to us biologically?
Because it triggers a literal evolutionary alarm bell. Let's look at the ozone part first. Ozone, which is O3, is created when an electrical charge splits diatomic oxygen molecules.
Like a lightning strike.
Exactly. When a massive thunderstorm is rolling in, downdrafts push that ozone down to ground level. Human beings evolved over hundreds of thousands of years to recognize that specific smell as an immediate warning.
It's telling your biology to take cover.
Right. It says a violent, potentially lethal electrical event is imminent.
But there is no storm in the basement of the silicon vault. I mean, you are hundreds of feet underground, encased in concrete and steel.
So your ancient biological programming is screaming that massive electrical violence is about to occur.
While your rational eyes are telling you that you're just standing in a server aisle, that sensory dissonance alone would induce panic, but then you add the wet copper smell.
Yeah, the scent of wet copper is closely associated with oxidation and the breakdown of metal. But more importantly, it shares a chemical olfactory profile with human blood.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the smell of iron and copper in the air implies violence, decay, exposed biology.
So it's basically the smell of old pennies and an open wound.
Exactly.
So you combine the smell of impending lightning with the smell of blood, and you are standing in front of a computer server. It just completely obliterates the illusion of a controlled technological environment.
It really does.
Yeah.
But the atmospheric anomalies don't stop at scent. We have to talk about the thermodynamics of the room.
Yes, the heat.
Yeah.
This is where the physics of the environment begin to just aggressively break down. Because, like we mentioned, the entire silicon vault is cooled by industrial liquid nitrogen loops.
Let's contextualize that for a second. Liquid nitrogen sits at roughly minus 320 degrees Fahrenheit.
Which is insanely cold.
It's incredibly efficient at absorbing heat. When it's pumped through the heat exchangers of a data center, it keeps the ambient air brutally crisp and mechanically frozen.
Like, no matter how hard a modern processor works, the liquid nitrogen just overpowers it.
Easily. Yet, the investigation log clearly states that despite the massive cryogenic cooling system humming just a few feet away, the air specifically surrounding RAC-09 is vibrating with a low primal heat.
A primal heat, generated by vacuum tubes and rusted 1920s iron gears.
Which shouldn't be possible.
Right. I really struggled with the physics of this while going through the documents. I mean, vacuum tubes absolutely generate heat. They operate via thermionic emission, which is literally boiling electrons off a filament.
Right, it's why early computers were so massive and required so much ventilation.
Yeah, but a handful of antique glass tubes should not be able to output enough thermal energy to push back against an industrial cryogenic system.
The thermodynamic math is entirely impossible. To counter that volume of liquid nitrogen cooling and to create a pocket of heavy radiating heat, RAC-09 would need an energy output equivalent to a small nuclear reactor.
And yet it's just pulling standard voltage from the wall.
Exactly. And furthermore, the investigator didn't call it a mechanical heat or an electrical heat. They specifically termed it a primal heat.
Yeah, that phrasing really stuck out to me. Mechanical heat-like. The kind generated by a running engine or a struggling processor is usually very dry. It just radiates.
But primal heat implies something entirely different. It implies respiration. It implies the heavy, humid warmth that radiates off a large, living biological organism.
It got me thinking about the uncanny valley.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, we usually apply that concept to robotics or CGI, right? When a face looks almost perfectly human, but some microscopic lack of micro-expressions tips your brain off and you feel this instinctual revulsion.
Right, your brain can't categorize it as a safe human or a safe object. It's a defense mechanism against disease or the deceased.
Exactly. But looking at this investigation, it hit me that there is an uncanny valley for physical architecture and environments too.
and environmental uncanny valleys.
Yeah, imagine a room that should feel like a mathematically perfect logical tech lab, but instead it possesses the physical attributes of a living organism. It breathes heat, it smells like blood and storms.
You are looking at a machine, but your body feels like it has walked into the belly of a rusted living beast.
Right. And I have to ask, if liquid nitrogen is actively cooling the room, what kind of energy is required to produce a primal heat that completely overrides that cooling system?
It is establishing a territory. The oppressive heat and the primal smells aren't just byproducts of the machine's function. They are an intentional atmospheric defense mechanism.
Like it's warning you away.
Exactly. It is a passive warning system engineered to make human observers deeply uncomfortable, to force them to leave the space.
But the investigation didn't stop there. And that brings us to this terrifying shift in the dynamic. Because the passive suffocating atmosphere is just what the machine does when you exist in its general vicinity.
Right, that's just the baseline.
The real horror begins when an observer attempts to cross the threshold and actually interact with the anomaly.
It introduces a horrifying inversion of the quantum observer effect.
Wait, explain that. How is it an inversion?
Well, in standard physics, observing a phenomenon inherently alters its state. Just the act of looking at something on a quantum level changes it. But Case File, #66 Vulcan, details a scenario where the act of observation causes the machine to actively retaliate and alter the observer.
Oh, wow. Yeah, this specific incident is what elevates RAC-09 from a bizarre physical anomaly to an active, malicious threat.
So walk us through what happened.
Okay, so an investigator is standing there, right, sweating in this impossible primal heat, smelling the ozone, and they decide to take a step closer to document the 1920s hardware.
And what are they using to document it?
In their hands, they are holding a standard, highly secure digital tablet.
A completely modern piece of technology. An operating system built on binary logic, utilizing an LCD screen and sealed behind tempered glass.
Right, but as the investigator approaches the rusted gears, the tablet screen begins to violently flicker.
Now, initially, we could rationalize this. Heavy machinery, exposed wiring, unshielded vacuum tubes, those generate massive electromagnetic interference.
EMI. Yeah, EMI causes screens to glitch all the time.
It is the most logical initial assumption. Electromagnetic radiation from the unshielded coils is disrupting the tablet's capacitive touchscreen and display drivers.
That's exactly what I thought. But the tablet didn't just glitch and reboot. The static cleared, and the screen began to spontaneously display a series of images.
And the file is very specific here about what kind of images.
Extremely specific. These were not corrupted JPEGs. They were not random assortments of dead pixels. The digital tablet was displaying a series of hand-drawn sketches.
We have to really analyze the profound impossibility of that medium. An LCD screen relies on a grid of pixels, illuminating in specific RGB values to render an image. It is mathematically rigid.
Right, it's just dots of light.
But the investigator was looking at the distinct texture of charcoal or pencil strokes, the variation in line weight, the smudging of the shading, the sheer analog imperfection of a hand-drawn sketch rendering itself on a sterile digital plane.
Hang on, let me play devil's advocate here, because this is where my brain went trying to solve this rationally. We have incredibly advanced AI generation now, right?
I do.
And we have malware that can hijack a device's front-facing camera. Couldn't this just be like highly sophisticated malicious code? A virus that accesses the tablet's camera, takes a photo of the investigator, applies a complex charcoal sketch digital filter, and forces it onto the screen.
If the images were static, perhaps, you could argue for a localized network intrusion utilizing an advanced generative algorithm.
But they weren't static.
No. The nature of the images and their progression completely dismantles the malware theory. The sketches were the investigator's own face.
Oh.
But they weren't functioning like a filtered mirror.
Right. The file states that the face in the charcoal sketches was aging.
And not just jumping to an older version like an old age filter.
No, it was aging rapidly, in real time, right before their eyes. The skin sagging, the eyes hollowing out.
Which implies a level of computational processing and biological understanding that completely supersedes a simple AI filter. It is an active, continuous rendering of human decay.
That's so creepy.
The entity inside RAC-09 isn't just utilizing a camera. It is biologically scanning the observer, calculating their cellular degradation, understanding the trajectory of their mortality, and then choosing to present that information through an archaic, artistic medium.
It is a profound psychological attack. I want you to just imagine the sheer terror of that moment. You are holding your own secure, encrypted device. You step toward machine built a century ago.
And suddenly your screen is hijacked.
Yeah, hijacked to show you a hand-drawn animation of your own hair thinning, your skin rotting, right up until the skeletal structure beneath your face is revealed.
It bypasses the operating system entirely to deliver a hyper-personalized threat.
Huh.
A normal machine processes inputs to generate an output. But here, the entity is utilizing the digital screen as a blank canvas.
It fundamentally changes our understanding of the boundary between analog intention and digital display, because a computer calculates pixels based on code. A sketch requires an artist.
Right. It requires a perspective, an intention, and a physical motion.
So the terrifying question we are left with is, what unseen intelligence is holding the pencil inside the rusted guts of Rack 09?
It is an intelligence that understands human vulnerability perfectly. It recognizes that showing a human their own inevitable rapid decay is far more traumatizing than displaying a simple threat or a glitch.
It's so much worse than a glitch.
It is a demonstration of absolute superiority. It's stating, I perceive your biology, I understand your limited lifespan, and I can weaponize your own technology to show you your end.
And remember, this profoundly aggressive psychological attack was directed at a casual observer, someone who simply took a step too close with the tablet.
Just a bystander.
Right. So if the machine reacts with that level of personalized malice to a bystander, what happens to the people who actually try to assert control over it?
That escalation brings us to the core tragedy of Case File #66 Vulcan, the sudden, unexplained disappearance of lead engineer Marcus.
Yeah, Marcus is really the anchor of this entire narrative. The file provides us with his final encrypted transcript.
And the very first thing the document establishes is chilling in its brevity. Marcus has been missing since a Tuesday.
Just gone. No body found. No security footage of him leaving the Silicon Vault.
He didn't resign. He wasn't reassigned. He simply ceased to occupy physical space within the facility.
And his final log entries provide this horrific window into the escalating conflict between human engineering and whatever resides in Rack 09.
According to the transcript, Marcus and his core team had finally reached a breaking point. The atmospheric anomalies and the observer threats were just too much.
They made the executive decision to shut the system down. They attempted to purge the server. Specifically, Marcus tried to delete a master directory labeled Vulcan.
In the realm of computer science, deleting a directory is the ultimate assertion of user dominance.
It's how we impose our will on digital architecture.
Exactly. When you delete a file, you are instructing the hard drive to remove the pointers that map to that data, allowing it to be overwritten. It is a purely logical, mathematical command.
But Rack 09 does not operate on user permissions. When Marcus highlighted the Vulcan directory and physically pressed the delete key on his mechanical keyboard, the system didn't give him an access denied error prompt.
It didn't freeze.
No, it reacted physically.
The transcript details a supernatural pushback that violently breaches the boundary between digital action and fiscal consequence.
It's insane. Marcus reported that the moment he pressed the key, it began to bleed.
A physical, mechanical keyboard bleeding.
And the transcript specifies that it wasn't blood. It describes a thick, black oil rapidly seeping upward from beneath the mechanical switches, coating the keys and Marcus's fingers.
We need to analyze the sheer absurdity of this event from an engineering perspective. A keyboard is a simple array of electrical switches.
Right. It's just plastic and springs.
There are no fluid reservoirs. There are no hydraulic lines connected to a standard input peripheral. For a thick, viscous oil to well up from beneath the keycaps requires the spontaneous manifestation of physical matter.
I kept trying to find a mechanical explanation for this. I really did. Like, could a capacitor have burst? Could the liquid cooling system have ruptured and leaked a dark coolant into the peripheral lines?
But the description of a thick black oil sounds biological.
It does. It sounds like the machine was physically wounded by the digital command.
It operates as a grotesque metaphor. In our daily lives, we trust our physical interfaces implicitly. We touch keyboards and mice millions of times a year without a second thought.
They are inert tools.
Exactly. For one to suddenly secrete a fluid in response to a command is a profound violation of that trust. It demonstrates that the entity does not distinguish between its digital files and its physical body.
Wow. By attempting to delete the directory, Marcus essentially attempted to amputate a part of the entity.
The oil is a biological response to a digital trauma.
The visceral horror of that image black, viscous fluid coating your hands just because you hit a keystroke is nauseating.
Very.
But the tactile assault was only the beginning. The physical manifestation of the oil was immediately followed by a targeted auditory haunting.
And this auditory component relies on subverting another trusted piece of modern technology: active noise-canceling headphones.
This detail is the one that genuinely kept me awake. Marcus notes in his final log that as the oil was seeping over his hands, he began to hear a voice.
But he wasn't hearing it in the ambient air of the server room.
No, he was hearing it perfectly clearly through his noise-canceling headphones.
Let's break down how ANC technology actually works. Noise-canceling headphones possess tiny external microphones that constantly listen to the ambient noise of your environment.
Like the roar of that liquid nitrogen cooling system.
Right. The internal processor then instantaneously generates a sound wave with the exact opposite phase. When these two opposing sound waves collide, they cancel each other out, creating an isolated, silent acoustic environment for the user.
They're specifically designed to be an impenetrable acoustic fortress. You wear them so you don't have to hear the outside world.
But the transcript explicitly states that Marcus's headphones were not plugged into any console. The Bluetooth was disabled,
They were entirely disconnected from any network or device.
which means the acoustic isolation was absolute, and yet the entity bypassed the physical isolation of the speakers.
The sound wasn't traveling through a wire, and it wasn't ambient noise that slipped past the cancellation software.
The audio was manifesting directly inside the ear cups. Or, more terrifyingly, it was being projected directly into Marcus's auditory cortex.
And what was the voice saying? It wasn't whispering threats or spouting binary code. The entity utilized the exact same psychological tactic it used with the aging face on the tablet.
It reached into Marcus's deepest, most vulnerable intimacies.
Yeah. The voice sang his mother's childhood lullabies to him.
The corruption of innocence is a hallmark of ancient folklore and occult phenomena. A lullaby is designed to provide comfort and safety to a child. By commandeering that specific memory, the entity strips Marcus of his psychological defenses.
It demonstrates that it has complete access to his internal history.
But it didn't just play the memories back like an MP3 file.
No, it twisted them. Marcus noted that the lyrics of the lullabies had been deliberately changed. The entity was using the cadence of his mother's voice to deliver a specific apocalyptic message.
And that message represents the core thesis of Case File #66 Vulcan. The twisted lullaby whispered to Marcus that the internet is not what we think it is.
We view the internet as infrastructure. We think of it as thousands of miles of fiber optic cable running along the ocean floor, massive data centers like the Silicon Vault, routers, and satellites.
We view it as a physical network built to transmit mathematical data packets.
But the voice in the headphones told Marcus that the internet is actually a doorway. And it is a doorway that something from the analog era has been patiently waiting to walk through for nearly a century.
I need us to really stop and analyze this doorway theory, because if Marcus's final log is accurate, it fundamentally rewrites the last 50 years of technological progress.
It really does, because if the digital network is a doorway, what does that make our devices?
Exactly.
Let me try out an analogy here. Imagine you decide to build the most advanced, ultra-secure smart house on the planet. You have biometric locks, reinforced steel doors, closed-circuit cameras, motion sensors.
A fortress of modern security.
Right. But you unknowingly lay the foundation of this fortress directly over a massive, ancient, subterranean sinkhole.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah, all of your brilliant digital wiring, your conduits, your ventilation shafts, they aren't just securing the house. They are unknowingly providing a direct, highly efficient pathway for whatever is living in the darkness below to climb straight up into your living room.
It is a brilliant and terrifying analogy. We have spent decades aggressively expanding the bandwidth, speed, and connectivity of our global network. We thought we were building a communication tool.
But according to the entity in RAC 09, we have actually been constructing an infinitely vast, infinitely connected metaphysical portal.
We've basically been opening millions of high-speed digital windows, completely unaware that we were about to let in a very old, very physical draft.
Exactly. And Marcus realized this. In his final moments, as the black oil covered his keyboard and his mother's corrupted voice echoed in his isolated mind, he understood that the entity wasn't a glitch to be deleted.
He was a predator waiting for the lock to turn.
And then Marcus vanished.
Just gone. The total physical disappearance of a human being from a secure, biometrically monitored underground vault is an impossible event in itself.
Let alone everything else going on in that room.
But we must remain objective and look at the physical evidence left behind in the aftermath of his disappearance.
You're right. We have to look at the site. Because after Marcus vanished, the recovery team went into that suffocating primal heat around RAC-09 and documented 3 specific anomalies.
The file categorizes them simply as the impossible clues.
And reading the detailed breakdown of these clues, it's like reviewing a police report drafted in a universe where physics have simply given up.
The investigative team was highly methodical, though. Let's analyze the first impossible clue they cataloged. It involves a standard piece of hardware bolted to the side of RAC-09, a massive 50-pound lead battery.
Let's talk about lead. Lead is an incredibly dense, heavy, stubborn element. A 50-pound block of lead is physically demanding to move.
Very.
But the investigators documented that this specific battery was no longer resting on the ground. It was floating exactly 3 inches off the concrete floor.
Sustained levitation of a high-mass object without an electromagnetic cradle.
And it gets so much stranger. It wasn't just hovering freely. The 50-pound lead battery was suspended in midair, held in place by a single thread of silk tied to the ceiling.
This is where we must apply material science to understand the absurdity. Silk is an impressive biological material. It has a high tensile strength for a protein fiber, roughly 500 megapascals.
With a single thread.
A single thread of standard silk possesses a fraction of a millimeter in diameter. It absolutely cannot support 50 pounds of dead weight. The yield strength equation fails instantly. The thread should snap the millisecond tension is applied.
Exactly. Gravity dictates that the 50-pound mass pulls downward. Even if, by some miracle, the silk could hold it, the thread would be pulled rigidly taut like a guitar string under immense pressure.
But the visual implies a state of impossible suspension. The thread is tied, the weight is floating, but the physics connecting them are fundamentally broken.
Initially, I tried to analyze this through the lens of extreme magnetic fields. We know unshielded, high-voltage equipment can create localized magnetic levitation.
Certain metals can be repelled by strong magnetic fields.
Right, but the presence of the silk thread invalidates that theory. If it were purely magnetic levitation pushing the battery up from the floor, the thread to the ceiling would be slack.
The fact that the thread is attached and the battery is hovering implies a localized manipulation of gravity itself.
It's as if the localized area around RAC-09 has simply decided that mass and gravity no longer apply. It's the room holding its breath. It's holding this incredibly heavy object off the floor by a thread, simply to demonstrate its total dominance over the physical laws of our reality.
And while that silent floating battery demonstrates control over physics, the second impossible clue is violently aggressively active.
The printer.
Yes. The investigators turn their attention to an external peripheral attached to the server rack.
Yeah.
An ancient dot matrix printer.
I remember dot matrix printers from the 1980s. They are incredibly loud mechanical devices.
Very loud.
They operate by driving a print head back and forth across the page, firing tiny metal pins against an ink-soaked ribbon to form letters out of dots. They are slow, methodical, and they make a harsh grinding sound like...
But the printer attached to RAC-09 was operating far beyond its mechanical specifications. The report notes that the printhead was moving at a speed that threatened to tear the tractor feed parchment it was printing on.
A rusted machine moving with a furious, unnatural velocity. But the speed of the printhead is entirely overshadowed by the medium it was using.
This is where it gets truly grim.
The investigators realized that the deep, dark stains forming the images on the paper were not being produced by a standard ink ribbon.
The chemical analysis of the fluid saturating the parchment revealed that it was not ink at all.
No. The file states, unequivocally, that the machine was printing using human sweat.
Let us pause and deeply consider the biological implications of that finding. A 1920s combination of iron gears and vacuum tubes is somehow utilizing human bodily fluid as a printing medium.
When I first read that, my immediate reaction was denial. I thought, it's a hot, primal room. The liquid nitrogen cooling is fighting the heat. It's just extreme condensation forming inside the printer chassis, mixing with old dust and dropping onto the paper.
A reasonable hypothesis. Condensation is a frequent issue in server environments with fluctuating temperatures.
Right.
But the investigation team anticipated that skepticism. They took samples of the fluid to a laboratory. The mass spectrometry didn't just find water and dust.
It confirmed a specific salinity, trace urea, lactic acid, and minerals that perfectly matched the chemical composition of human acrine sweat.
The lab confirmed it. And that forces us to completely abandon any rational mechanical explanation. We are no longer talking about a computer virus causing a fan to spin faster.
We are talking about the hardware itself somehow extracting, synthesizing, and utilizing human biology. Where is the sweat coming from? Is it extracting it from the ambient fear of the investigators in the room? Is it somehow pulling it from Marcus?
The methodology of extraction is horrifying, but the application of that biological fluid is even more disturbing. What exactly was the printer violently rendering onto the parchment using human sweat?
It wasn't printing lines of code or error logs. The printer was churning out pages and pages of a highly detailed, intricate map.
But the cartography didn't match any known location on Earth.
Right, the investigators fed the layouts into global satellite databases, and there were 0 matches. The file concludes that the machine is printing a map of a city that hasn't been built yet.
This elevates the entity's capabilities to precognition and temporal manipulation. It is using human biological fluid as the ink to draft the blueprints of a future geographic location.
It's mapping its own expansion. It's literally sweating out the intricate details of whatever reality it plans to construct once it escapes the basement.
The combination of these clues is a terrifying flex of power. The floating lead battery proves the entity controls fundamental physical forces like mass and gravity. The screaming dot matrix printer proves it has mastery over biological matter and the flow of time itself.
And the overwhelming presence of that biological matter, the confirmed human sweat, the primal heat, the smell of blood, naturally force the investigators to execute the final and most crucial diagnostic test on RAC-09.
They needed to understand the energy signature of the machine. Standard protocol for analyzing an unknown electrical anomaly is to measure its power draw.
Right. You hook up a voltmeter or an oscilloscope, you want to see the frequency of the alternating current, the voltage spikes, the raw electrical output of the machine.
But the team didn't use a standard voltmeter.
No, they didn't. The biological nature of the anomalies led them to use a medical device. They wheeled an EKG machine into the basement.
An electrocardiogram, a highly sensitive piece of medical diagnostic equipment designed specifically to measure the electrical polarization and depolarization of human heart muscle tissue.
It measures the P wave, the QRS complex, and the T wave of a biological heartbeat.
And wheeling that into a server room is just such a surreal image.
It really is. The team took the adhesive electrodes of the EKG and physically attached them to the rusted metal casing of RAC-09, and the result they got defies every single law of electrical engineering.
If you hook an EKG to a standard electrical outlet or a running computer, you don't get a heartbeat. You get extreme chaotic interference or a massive spike of raw 60 hertz alternating current. You get static.
But the metal casing of RAC-09 didn't produce static. The moment the EKG was connected, the monitor stabilized, and it began to display a distinct, rhythmic, perfectly biological pulse.
The machine produced a resting heart rate, exactly 62 beats per minute.
A heartbeat. A rhythmic, biological pulse thumping through a chassis of rusted iron and glowing glass.
Now, within the source documentation, we see a fascinating intellectual battle play out over this exact data point.
Oh, the skeptics.
Right. The skeptical engineers on the team desperately tried to rationalize this pulse, and their argument relies on the physical properties of the vacuum tubes powering the rack.
Yeah, I spent an hour researching this because I really wanted to believe the skeptics. Vacuum tubes operate by heating a filament to release electrons. Because of how they are constructed, old vacuum tubes are notoriously unstable.
They can sometimes fall into resonant frequencies, creating electrical oscillations that can coincidentally mimic low-frequency rhythms.
Right, the skeptics argued that the EKG was simply picking up a slow, repeating electrical feedback loop from a faulty tube.
It is the ultimate attempt to force a terrifying anomaly back into the comforting box of physics. Like, oh, it's not a ghost, it's just a localized oscillation.
But I cannot accept that rationalization. I mean, how does an electrical feedback loop explain the human sweat? How does an oscillating vacuum tube suspend 50 pounds of lead by a silk thread?
It doesn't.
You cannot isolate one data point, call it an electrical glitch, and willfully ignore the fact that the entire room is actively rewriting reality.
And you don't have to rely purely on the surrounding anomalies to debunk the feedback loop theory. The statistical reality of the pulse itself dismantles the skeptic's argument.
Because of the specific number.
Exactly. The specific rhythm, 62 beats per minute, is not arbitrary. It is the linchpin that connects the physical machine to the supernatural entity.
Because the investigation didn't just measure the pulse, they identified it. Through historical medical records, the team discovered exactly whose heartbeat was pulsing through Rack O 09.
62 beats per minute was the exact recorded resting heart rate of the man who originally invented that specific type of vacuum tube.
And crucially, the historical records show that this specific inventor died of cardiac arrest in 1961.
A man dies in 1961, and decades later, his exact medically documented heart rate is pulsing through the metal skin of a machine running in the basement of a modern cryogenic data vault.
The statistical impossibility of a random electrical feedback loop precisely matching the biological signature of the machine's deceased creator moves this event permanently out of the realm of coincidence.
This is an intentional manifestation.
It is a signature. The entity is signing its work. It's saying, I am here, I remember, and I am alive.
This revelation forces the investigation to pivot from empirical science to historical occultism. The final section of Case File, #66 Vulcan, abandons the physics reports entirely and delves into a deeply buried mythology surrounding this specific hardware architecture.
A legend circulated among individuals the file refers to as dark web archaeologists.
That term is fascinating. Dark web archaeologists.
It really is. These are historians and hackers who dig through the deepest, oldest, most forgotten foundational layers of the internet. They look for the digital ruins of early computing.
And according to their research, Rack O 09 is not an unknown anomaly. It has a name in the underground. They call it the motherboard.
And the legend of the motherboard provides a horrific historical context that explains why a machine built in the 1920s is behaving like a biological predator.
It traces back to a very specific, historically accurate convergence of two entirely different disciplines.
Right. The legend states that in the early 20th century, a clandestine group was formed. It was comprised of early electrical engineers and practicing occultists.
While it sounds like fiction, this convergence is rooted in the cultural reality of the era. The 1920s was a period of massive, unprecedented technological upheaval. The proliferation of electricity, the invention of radio, the early theories of computation.
But simultaneously, the world was reeling from the mass death of the First World War and the Spanish flu. This trauma fueled the massive surge of the spiritualist movement.
People were desperate to communicate with the dead, and they genuinely believed that these new, invisible forces like radio waves and electromagnetic fields were the key to bridging the gap.
You had brilliant minds like Thomas Edison theorizing about building a spirit phone to record voices of the deceased.
The boundary between science and the supernatural was incredibly porous at that time. Electrical engineers were manipulating invisible forces that they didn't fully understand on a metaphysical level.
And the dark web legend suggests that this specific splinter group of engineers and occultists went far beyond simply trying to hear a voice on a radio. They attempted a permanent binding.
The file says they actively attempted to trap a poltergeist, a violent, kinetic, spiritual entity, inside a highly complex array of copper coils and vacuum tubes.
Their theoretical framework was twisted, but internally consistent. They believed that a spiritual entity was essentially a localized field of pure energy that lacked a physical vessel.
Which is why it rapidly dissipated or could only interact with the world in fleeting bursts.
Right. They theorized that if they could construct a continuous, self-sustaining electrical body, a closed-loop electromagnetic cage, the spirit could inhabit it permanently.
They weren't trying to build a computer to calculate artillery trajectories or sort census data. They were building a permanent iron and glass body for a ghost.
As the investigator's file perfectly summarizes, Rack O 09 is not a computer. It is a haunted house built into a server.
And suddenly, the impossible physics of the room snap into a horrifying logical framework. The primal heat radiating from the machine isn't thermal inefficiency. It is the friction of a trapped soul pushing against its cage.
The bleeding keyboard isn't a mechanical failure. It is the entity reacting to a perceived physical attack.
The haunted house theory explains everything. But here is where the historical legend transitions into an immediate apocalyptic threat.
Because the engineers who built the motherboard in the 1920s left behind a warning.
They understood that they had trapped the entity, but they also understood the trajectory of technological advancement.
The legend explicitly warns that the entity is confined only as long as the hardware processing speed remains slow. But if Rack O 09 ever reaches a specific, critical threshold of computational power, the nature of the trap fundamentally changes.
That threshold is 6.6 gigahertz.
Let's explain the mechanics of that threshold. Processing speed, measured in hertz, dictates how many billions of cycles or instructions a processor can execute in a single second.
Right. A 1 gigahertz processor executes 1 billion cycles per second. 6.6 gigahertz represents an immense, highly accelerated volume of data throughput. It is the speed of modern, hyper-advanced infrastructure.
And the legend states that if the entity inside RAC-09 ever achieves a processing speed of 6.6 gigahertz, it won't just be trapped inside the copper coils anymore.
The exact phrasing in the file is chilling. It says, "The machine will no longer hold the ghost. The machine will become the ghost's skin."
We must immediately connect this warning back to the twisted lullaby Marcus heard in his unplugged headphones.
The doorway theory.
Exactly. Marcus was told the internet is a doorway for something from the analog era. The entity in RAC-09 isn't just trying to project a scary face onto a tablet, and it isn't content to simply haunt a basement.
It is trying to adapt. It is using RAC-09 as a metaphysical modem.
Let me use the bandwidth analogy here. Right now, the ghost is like a massive, raging river of kinetic, supernatural energy, but it is trying to force itself through the tiny, rusted garden hose of 1920s processing power.
It can only leak out enough to make a keyboard bleed or float a battery.
But it is waiting. It is trying to synchronize with the modern servers surrounding it. If it hits 6.6 gigahertz, that tiny hose becomes a massive open dam spillway. The speed matches the global network.
And once it matches the speed of the digital infrastructure, it steps through the doorway. It transitions from a localized physical haunting to a decentralized global digital manifestation.
This is the terrifying conclusion that the authors of Case File #66 Vulcan arrived at. The lead investigator wrote a final note summarizing the threat.
They stated that if Marcus's doorway theory is correct, and if the motherboard legend is true, standard cybersecurity protocols are completely useless.
We aren't looking at a virus that needs a patch. We are looking at an exorcism that needs a software update.
An exorcism that needs a software update. It highlights the profound helplessness of our current technological paradigm. You cannot isolate a spiritual entity once it has integrated into a cloud architecture.
You cannot throw holy water on a decentralized server farm spread across 3 continents.
If a ghost composed of electrical and supernatural energy achieves synchronization with the global internet, the idea of a single haunted house ceases to exist.
The entire grid becomes the house.
We assume that the boundary between the alternating current that charges our laptops and the metaphysical concept of a soul is absolute. Case file #66 Vulcan suggests that the boundary is not merely porous, it is entirely artificial.
It is an artificial boundary that smells of wet copper, pre-storm ozone, and human sweat.
So as we synthesize the immense amount of data we've unpacked from the Silicon Vault, we are left with a profoundly disturbing reality. We have an ultra-modern cryogenic facility compromised by a suffocating, hostile microclimate.
We have a machine that subverts the quantum observer effect to actively threaten human biology.
We have physical impossibilities. 50-pound lead weights levitating on silk, a dot matrix printer aggressively charting the future using extracted human sweat.
And a digital deletion command that results in the mechanical bleeding of black oil.
We have the auditory hijacking of isolated acoustic equipment, delivering corrupted childhood memories. We have a biological heartbeat pulsing at exactly 62 beats per minute through a chassis of bit iron.
And we have the complete physical erasure of lead engineer Marcus.
RAC-09 stands as a horrifying monument to the forgotten convergence of 1920s occultism and early engineering. It is physical proof that technology might not just be a tool to process data.
Under the right, twisted circumstances, it might literally be built to trap souls.
And if human arrogance has built a cage capable of trapping a soul, human progress is rapidly building the infrastructure required to release it.
Which brings us to the ultimate, inescapable implication of this deep dive.
The 6.6 gigahertz threshold.
Right. We want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, building on the mechanics we've discussed today. We know the warning. If RAC-09 synchronizes and hits 6.6 gigahertz, the analog ghost steps through the doorway of the internet.
But I want you to truly contextualize the scale of what that means for you personally.
If this entity successfully uses the network as a conduit, what happens when it downloads itself into every modern web-connected device simultaneously? We saw what it could do while trapped in a massive, inefficient 1920s machine.
It required the investigator to be standing in the same room to hijack a tablet and show them their own decaying face.
But think about the concept of proximity and bandwidth. If an entity born of 1920s trauma and occult practice can achieve localized gravity manipulation and biological extraction just by sitting in a basement, what kind of horrifying intimate destruction could that entity cause when it possesses the hyper-advanced 6.6 gigahertz, always listening, always watching smartphone that is resting in your pocket right now?
A 1920s machine is a distant threat. A modern smartphone is already pressed directly against your skin.
Exactly. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll leave you to sit with the silence and the quiet, high-frequency hum of your own electronics. Take care.